Now that we know everything about the ecocide theory and the dynamics of Easter Island, it's time to put it to the test some more. The story is both a vivid tragedy of human irrespect for nature and also possibly a dark omen of how things could turn out for us in our global capitalistic civilization. But of course, sometimes perfect stories can be even too good to be true. And in that case, we have to make sure we're not ignoring some inconvenient details from the account of European explorers that do not fit our ecocide narrative of Jared Diamond. So here are a few I've noted. So first of all, Roggeveen said that the islanders met them in canoes. So evidently they didn't need the forest to build them and they could fish if they wanted to. Also, all explorers said that they were friendly, that they had no weapons. So this doesn't fit very well with the idea that there was a civil war and cannibalism going on after the collapse of the forest. Also, the story of the bones is still mysterious. So the Lapérouse and James Cook saw bones, but Roggeveen and González de Aedo do not mention them. Also, you may have noticed that the model predicts nearly a stable population near its minimum. So when we reach a minimum population, then the growth rate is 0 before going back up. But that doesn't seem to fit what we see happen according to explorers. So González de Aedo estimated that the population was 3,000 in 1770, like Roggeveen. But then James Cook estimated that they were no more than 600 or 700 in 1774, just 4 years later. And finally, Moai worship seemed to be present according to Roggeveen in 1722, and also González de Aedo. But James Cook thought that Moais merely served as burying places. So, are you starting to form some idea? There seems to be to have been some major catastrophes between González de Aedo and 4 years later when Cook arrived. And this catastrophe doesn't seem to have taken centuries to occur. While pondering about this, let's look at more recent archaeological work that attempt to answer our two most pressing questions. What happened to the palm forest on the island, and how did islanders transport the Moai everywhere on the island? The idea is they had to be a large population in the past to do it, so that's what gave birth to this old collapse narrative later on. So if not, what transported the statues? Aliens, maybe? Well, two archaeologists, Terry Hunt and Carl Lippo, wanted to know. They started working on Rapa Nui in 2001 and published their findings in 2011. So here are their findings. The island was not colonized in 400 AD or in 700 AD, but much later, around 1200 AD, according to them. And the Polynesians accidentally brought rats with them on their boats, and so introduced rats to the island. So they think that the rats are the ones who ate the seed of the forest, because Hawaii, a similar Pacific island, had similar palm trees, and they are in serious trouble because of rats invasion from other places right now. So of course the rats had a large stock of fruits and seed and absolutely no predators, so they could breed at a staggering rate. The population could have doubled every 47 days, so it's no question that the forest would have disappeared very rapidly because of the rats infestation. So was it a tragedy for the islanders? Well, they say no. They say no because the palm trees are actually not that useful for them. They have thin, brittle bark and a soft, fibrous interior. So it's bad for building canoes, and it's also bad to use as roller for the statues. So it was simply of little use for them. Maybe they burned some of it to make space for agriculture, but they didn't really use them all that use the forest all that much. Also, there was little fish around the island anyways. So early on, islanders didn't eat fish or bird, they ate rats mostly. Then they had a sustained culture of sweet potatoes, taro, and manioc. So they may have burned some of the forest, as I said, but to some little extent, it's not the main reason why the forest disappeared. And then about the mata, so microscopic evidence shows that actually they were used in agriculture, not in war, and frankly, they don't use like they would be. They don't look like they would be very useful as war weapons, anyways. So it looks much less like a story of rise and collapse than actually of a story of avoiding collapse and adapting successfully to an island with very very difficult conditions. There was no collapse because there was no large population to collapse from in the first place. But then remained the big enigma. How could the islanders transport the Moai with a little population, without rollers or without other wooden equipment? So from the way they were scattered between the quarry and their final destination, Hunt and Lipo soon got the idea of how this was done. But to be sure, they actually scanned a Moai and molded it in concrete to experiment on it themselves and try their method. So it turns out that if you know how to transport it, you don't need to be thousands of people. For an average size Moai, maybe 50 will do. The trick is to let the Moai walk by himself. So it looks like the population didn't experience a boom and a crash, but actually a slow and steady increase to its steady state. And Hunt and Lipo do think that building Moai was something to occupy people, actually to decrease their preference for food or behind the model. So since they couldn't exploit more resource on their island anyways, then it was a way for them to do something else. It's not a sad story of overexploitation, but a positive story of people thriving in difficult environments by managing well their limited resource. By now, you must have guessed what happened after the Spanish expedition, like what happened to so many other New World civilizations when Europeans made first contact. Of course, the Spanish brought germs to Rapa Nui, and within 4 years, more than half of the islanders had died. After 1800, things didn't go better. Other Europeans started raiding the islands for slaves, and they brought other epidemics with them like tuberculosis, smallpox, and dysentery. So this was not an ecocide caused by the islanders, it was a series of demographic disasters brought by Europeans. So is the predator-prey model useless to explain the collapse of the forest then? Well, actually not at all. It's just that the predator was not the humans, the predator was the rat. And when the forest had collapsed, actually the rat population also collapsed because they were out of food. So even if the whole ecocide story is not accurate in the first place, does that mean that we can't learn from it? Well, far from it. As you are going to see, it could help us a lot learn about the risks and the future of the current climate crisis if we adapt the model to current conditions, as we'll do in a moment.